What's happening, everybody? John Hendrix here with Ross Jackson for Saints News Network, coming at you, talking a little bit more Saints football. Ross, how's things going first and foremost?
Good, man. Good. Glad to be here with you and excited that we've got enough to look forward to very, very quickly. I feel like we're finally beyond the it's so far away distance of training camp to the it's officially around the corner distance of training
Yeah.
camp. So that's always great. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing okay, man. Just hanging in there, trying to stay cool, and that's obviously a challenge. I tell people I was on a Roto World thing. I said I have to pray over my AC every single day I wake up. It's just kind of how things work. So that's just to make sure it works, and it's been fantastic. Knock on wood. But
Fingers crossed.
yeah. So you mentioned it. We're getting close to football action. The rookies report here in just a few days, July 18th. Veterans, a week after that, and then we got our first
25th.
practice coming up 25th, yeah, and then practice is the next day, and then we've got, by our count, the Saints training camp schedule got announced. 22 practices that we'll be in attendance for, and that includes the joint practices as well. Only 7 open to fans this year, something they scaled back. They had 9, technically 10 last year with the Superdome one, something that we kind of talked about, and I talked about that they were going to scale back, and that was kind of the plans.
Yep.
But the big news, when we'll get into training camp talking about it, 2 big items. First thing, let's start with no hard knocks for the Saints. Your thoughts, Jets, right choice, wrong choice? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the Jets were the right choice. I think they're the obvious choice with the Aaron Rodgers saga going on and all that. I wondered if maybe the Washington Commanders would end up being that spot too. I mean, with the team sale and with the new quarterback situation there, Eric Bieniemy, everybody kind of wants to figure out who is he, like what's going on in terms of his head coaching opportunities and things like that. That would have shined a lot of light onto the people that say that it's about who he is or how players feel about him or whatever the criticisms are. So I think that could have been interesting. But I mean, look, when you have the biggest quarterback name in the NFL right now, or one of the biggest quarterback names in the NFL right now, changing teams and headed to one of the craziest media markets available, that's an obvious choice for the NFL. And I love that the New Orleans Saints dodged the bullet. I talked about this on Thursday's episode of Locked On Saints, that the Saints don't need to be focused on changing a narrative or controlling narratives during an HBO special. They need to be able to focus on changing the narratives once they hit the field and where it matters. And I think Dennis Allen sees it similarly. He's mentioned before, he doesn't want to do it. They don't want the distraction. So I'm glad that the Saints were able to avoid that.
Yeah, look, and we talked to players in the locker room like Jamal Williams, Derek Carr. They said it's not really as invasive as sometimes they make it out to be, and then they kind of know based on body language and stuff, there's certain things just don't put out there and stuff. But still, like Dennis Allen said, it's a distraction. It's just one of those things. And look, you don't go through this whole entire saga of Aaron Rodgers contemplating retirement, going into the darkness, doing all this types of stuff, not necessarily getting a trade right off the bat. The Jets were going to be the thing. You don't do that and then put them in the primetime national spotlight. They got 5 primetime games this year. I mean, it just made sense, right? And I think that's the idea. It's the Big Apple. Now you're wanting to put them in a space. I think it's going to draw a lot of eyes and such. But it's weird that the NFL waited so long. It's a tribute to saying, hey, look, you had the Lions announced last March. Now it's less than 2 weeks before training camp. Now you finally get somebody. And I mean, it was truly an involuntary assignment, if you will. And the Saints, obviously, I've talked about a report or wrote in my article about it, just saying they want to avoid this headache, make the playoffs. And this all goes away unless, they can Dennis Allen, which I don't see happening, but I mean, it's entertainment, but again, it is a distraction, whether you want to admit it or not and such. But, there's other crazy things out there, like teams going to the Greenbrier that are going to practice there and stuff that might be out there that might be things to follow this training camp. Saints aren't in that boat.
Yeah, thank goodness for that. I mean, we all know how that goes. John, you and I are just gonna have to figure out a new way to find our way onto HBO airwaves. That's all. We're just gonna have to figure out how we get there.
Missed opportunity. I just realized that. Yeah, we could have had our premiere breakout on television or something like that. Yeah, writing copious, furious notes, often siloed to our side, just trying to what are these guys doing? Besides sweating. They're going to miss my little, boonie hat that I wear and stuff. So
that's right. That's right.
Keep out of the sun. But at any rate.
And Sharif's umbrella hat won't make it. Out. Dang.
Oh, well. Missed opportunity. I'll sacrifice it to know that we're not going to have to deal with it. So, But that's obviously one big storyline that we've seen from the Saints, but that's not the biggest one. The major one is on Alvin Kamara. Why don't you just go ahead and dive in, kind of inform everybody where things have gone, where things were at, and we'll kind of piggyback and go from there.
Yeah, it's been an eventful week for Alvin Camaro. We expected that we weren't really going to see much resolution for his ongoing court case, which has been effectively ongoing since the February 2022 incident in Las Vegas, which took place during the Pro Bowl, or not during the Pro Bowl, but while players were in Las Vegas for the Pro Bowl. He was a little busy during the Pro Bowl. And so, what you look at now is that we were expecting kind of the July 31st trial date after, the hearing was continued and finally got that. And we got that date. But now that date doesn't really matter at this point. Doesn't matter at all. That's all done. That's been canceled because Alvin Kamara's criminal case has concluded, as well as the civil case, which is here in New Orleans, was settled on confidential terms. So that's how that one ends up. We won't know what the numbers were. I think the original civil suit was for $10 million. So we have to imagine that it's yeah. And so we have to imagine it was something under that probably that ended up being the settlement, but that's about all that we get there. But when it comes to the criminal case, which was a felony charge originally in Las Vegas, it was conspiracy to commit battery resulting in bodily harm was the original charge. That is now null and void because Alvin Kamara pled no contest to a misdemeanor charge instead. So that drops it from a felony to a misdemeanor, which is huge. Like for him personally, like as a human being, to not have a felony on his record. Now he can get like loans and jobs, and I guess he doesn't have to worry about a job. He's settled there. But you know what I mean? Like he doesn't have that over him and everything for the rest of his life. It's a misdemeanor charge that ended up resulting in 30 days of community service, which, if I remember correctly, has to be fulfilled within the next 90 days, or 30 hours of community service, which has to be fulfilled within the next 90 days. And then $100 or a $500 fine, as well as over $100,000 in medical bills for the victim. But the good news here is that the highlights around all this is that it's finally over in terms of the legal process, which is great, which means we don't have to talk much about legal things too much anymore, which is always great for me. It's great for Alvin Kamara as well. You get the misdemeanor dropping to, the felony dropping to a misdemeanor charge, which could have an impact on the length of the suspension that we expect may happen from the NFL. There's no consistency from the NFL in this fact, so we'll have to see how it goes. But if it was a felony charge, it would have been, according to the code of conduct policy, a minimum 6-game suspension once the NFL does hand out its discipline. Now, when they do make that decision, it could potentially be less than that. So that's the next domino to fall, and final domino to fall in this whole situation is, what does the NFL do once they've finished and wrapped up their independent investigation around this situation?
Yeah, and the NFL has their hands full. I mean, you got this stuff with the John Gruden stuff. You've got the commander cell, as we talked about before. I mean, you got the gambling hot button right now. It's just a big deal. Yeah. I mean, not saying this would fly under the radar, but at the same time with Camara, this is the point, is that we always had to wait for the legal process to play out. Now the NFL discipline can step in, usually form a committee of this. They, impose whatever the suspension may be. And the thing is, regardless of what Camara gets, even if it was a 6-game suspension, he can appeal that, which would go to, pretty much fall on Roger Goodell to have the final say-so for here and such. But, the optics of it, everything, how it's played out. I think another part that's really big in this is that with the civil suit, he did have to issue and sign a public apology to Darnell Green. I don't know how much that's going to go for him, but it's one of those that I feel like in the nuances that, hey, it's past him. Now we can worry about it. It's maybe opens the door for him to get suspended earlier in the season if the NFL can kind of put things together. If it's a first couple of games of the year, I think, 6 seems like the baseline. I think it can be shorter than that. I think 3 or 4 maybe to start might be the starting point. And if he appeals, he can get down to maybe 2. But, could he not get suspended at all? I don't know. That's a tough one to tackle just because of everything that plays out. And, again, they kind of knew about everything that was going down when he was at the Pro Bowl, and they still let him play. So, I don't know. Just been a weird thing with Camara. But, even with that, the Saints always had expected some type of suspension for him. Now, when you look at the final roster, all those types of things, they brought in Jamal Williams, they signed Kendre Miller, they have Kirk Merritt, who looked pretty sharp in OTAs and minicamp. You got Eno Benjamin on the roster. He has been battling the injury, but, I think regardless of when Camara gets suspended, and if he does get suspended, this depth chart is equipped to handle it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's one of the things that makes it so that if the suspension does happen, it happening at the beginning of the season is actually a little advantageous for New Orleans.
Mm.
First of all, if it happens towards the back half of their schedule, the Saints' last AFC matchup, AFC game, or game against an AFC opponent is week 9. Everything after that is NFC, which means everything after that has playoff implications. And so if it's set towards the back part or beyond the middle of the schedule, that could potentially be detrimental to the New Orleans Saints to lose a key weapon in their offense during a stretch run where they're playing nothing but NFC and, of course, NFC South divisional opponents towards the back end of the schedule. So I think that's a big piece of it. And I also think that at the beginning of the season, your ideally your roster is healthier than it is at the end of the season, right? So your ability to be able to rely on other playmakers, to have other playmakers available to you on the field, that ends up having a big impact on your ability to still be able to produce in the offensive side without one of your key players. But even just in terms of the run game, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, these guys should be able to do enough to keep the run game afloat for sure. Jamal Williams makes the New Orleans Saints better where they struggled last year, which is running between the tackles. And in a way, the New Orleans Saints could make Jamal Williams better where the Detroit Lions have struggled over the course of the past 2 years, where they had negative success rates running to the left outside and right outside, where the Saints were very successful doing both those things, especially over to the outside right towards Ryan Ramczyk. So I do think that ends up having a big impact too, about if this happens early, at least you've got the fresh legs of the other running backs that you took the time to invest in over the course of this offseason.
Absolutely. And their bye week is until week 11 too. So that's another point. It's like, the sooner it gets wrapped up, the better it is for the Saints. And again, you touched on Jamal Williams, and even with it, and something I've wrote about fantasy and just have told people is that Dennis Allen has told us that they want to take some of the workload off of Camara in the first place. So again, if you're a fantasy player, that's not good news or anything. It's just obviously proceed with caution. But, look, Camara was getting a lot more of the reps, and his usage last year was just it was puzzling. You're in a red zone situation. You're in a third and manageable situation, and Alvin Kamara's off the field. I don't understand that. And again, I think that's where Pete Carmichael's got to get better at play calling and just know your personnel. But I think some of that could also be attributed. You're using Camara first and second down. You're doing all these things. You're just kind of, I don't want to say overutilizing them, but when you have your pick of the litter where it's Camara and no disrespect to Mark Ingram, but you're looking at Alvin Kamara being your guy. And that's why I feel better about their depth chart in situations where, you have a Jamal Williams, you're going to have a Kendre Miller, you could have an Eno Benjamin, you could have Kirk Merrick that can catch out of the backfield and do different things as well for you. And so I think a lot of it's going to hinge and play to his benefit. I don't think that, to tell you that he's going to end up being an 80-plus catch guy like he was when Drew was around in his first few seasons. I don't see that. I think he can be active in the passing game. I think he can run the football, but when you're looking at tough yards and just what the Saints offensive line, which honestly, we might have hit on it a little bit, but I'm a little bit more concerned than a lot of people as far as the Saints offensive line. I don't know necessarily what the vision is totally there. I've had thoughts on it, but also it's a strength that they can't afford to have any chinks in the armor, right? And just the uncertainty of, is Trevor Penning going to start at left tackle? Is James Hurst going to kick in and maybe take Andres Pete's job? Is Cesar Ruiz completely healthy? Is Penning completely healthy?
Yeah, does Nick Saldiveri surprise?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot more questions there, and I just think that when you look at it, it's a little bit more of a moving parts and pieces. And also, how does Taysom Hill fit in? Right, he likes to do those powers. He does extremely well when he runs behind that offensive line too. So a little bit more, but I think again they're better positioned to handle those types of things. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. The other thing that I'll highlight just about the offensive line is that the Saints in 2022 alone ran as many extra or 6 offensive line run plays, just about as many. I think it was only 20 fewer than the Detroit Lions have run in the last 30 games, which includes 2 seasons worth of games, basically the last 30 games that Jamal Williams was active. And so that's another big piece around where having sort of that healthy offensive line and having a guy like James Hurst, maybe that if Andres Pete holds on to a starting left guard role, which I don't think they have to be married to that if he gets outperformed by anybody, thanks to the new contract and the way that everything was kind of redone. But, if you get that 6 offensive linemen out there, whether it be James Hurst, Landon Young, Calvin Throckmorton, maybe Nick Saldiveri, we'll see. That's another way for you to be able to help pave the way towards how you're utilizing Taysom Hill to contribute to the run game, Jamal Williams to contribute to the run game, Kendre Miller to contribute. There's so many different ways. And I do think that if Alvin Kamara's suspension happens and it happens early on in the season, that opens up your opportunity to be able to lean a little bit more on Taysom Hill in the run game. I think that actually works out pretty well for New Orleans.
Yeah.
They have so many ways to supplement that. And if you're worried about, well, what about the running back and the passing game? Then maybe that's a situation where guys like Kirk Merritt or Benjamin separate themselves, or maybe even Lynn Bowden, who they just brought in over the course of mini camps. They brought him in for the tryout, signed him and Kiki Cody, the wide receiver. Those are both guys, though all three of those guys are guys that are going to be able to catch out of the backfield. They love Joel Thomas specifically talked about Benjamin's route variety coming out of the backfield. That's a big piece. That's something they want to develop in Kendre Miller. Maybe that's not fully developed weeks 1, 2, 3. Maybe they're still in the process of building that. Benjamin already has that for you. So then while Alvin Kamara is out, you can maintain a little bit if he is, you can maintain a little bit or the majority of his playbook because of what Benjamin can do for you out of the backfield. And of course, we shouldn't forget that was Jamal Williams' role in Green Bay the 4 years that he was there, working in tandem with Aaron Jones and Aaron Rodgers, where he was catching it was nearly 40 passes per season. I know it doesn't sound like a ton, but I mean that is Latavius Murray, that is Mark Ingram in this New Orleans Saints offense, and that's exactly what you're looking for. And they've said already that look, those two guys that I just mentioned, Ingram and Murray, they weren't pass catchers before they showed up in New Orleans. New Orleans developed that out of them, and they expect to do the same thing with Jamal Williams.
Yeah, and Murray was an underrated guy in the passing game. Time. I mean, I know when he had to step up and do those types of things. Too. Yeah, he was just something nasty about him and such. So again, we'll see how it all plays out. And of course, when we get into training camp, temper their expectations. It's going to be early on. It's just going to be kind of slow. There's no pads. Then they'll move to shells. Then they move to pads. Right. And, it's going to be one of those things where we'll see a lot more here. But as far as training camp goes, I mean, there's a lot of things to pay attention to. And again, where things go on it, I mean, there's just so many battles. We touched on the cornerback battle on a recent video. We're talking about the running backs. There's going to be so much to pay attention to. And I just feel like in this one, when it comes down to it, you got a roster cut down of just straight from 90 to 53. So there is no middleman cut down. There's no light cut down. That's a lot of player movement. And it's just one of those that it's going to be interesting for me where New Orleans, or they decide to keep an extra running back. Is it an extra tight end? Is it 6 safeties? Is it an extra linebacker? I mean, there are so many different ways and variables about training camp. I honestly feel like it's a good problem to have necessarily is that, I don't think you're going to have as many undrafted guys on this roster. It's just one of those things where I don't think you have to have. I mean, they're great stories, but you don't have to have the undrafted guys come in and play a big role for you. And if it happens, great. But, this is a team that's built to be top to bottom, including their practice squad, really strong.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting cut down. And the thing that you love about this New Orleans Saints team is that since 2020 with the salary cap dip, they've been working really hard to rebuild their depth. And they've done a good job of that. Well, the offensive line is still a question mark for me. The interior defensive line is still a question mark for me. And linebacker is still a question mark for me. But, I mean, you look at how strong the secondary is at safety and at corner, how strong the wide receiver room has become. The tight end room is completely 180. The quarterback room is completely 180. The running back room is completely 180. Even the edge rusher, they have a lot of guys. You just wonder who's going to be the top one. Will it be Carl Granderson opposite Cam Jordan, or will somebody else be there? But even behind him, you've got Tonto Passanio, who's been great with New Orleans. You've got a lot of potential in Isaiah Foskey. And you're still waiting to figure out what Peyton Turner is and who he can be. But, I mean, he's got the tools to be able to do it as long as he can stay in shape and stay on the field. And so I think that, they've done a good job of rebuilding that depth all over the roster. So this is really kind of the first time, John, that I've gone into training camp without a real clear understanding of okay, here's what the build or the structure of the 53 is probably going to look like. Usually we can kind of templatize it as we go into training camp. They'll keep this many receivers, this many that. This is what they always do. Yeah. This is kind of the first year that I've been I don't know, man. I have no idea. I don't know what to expect. I don't know where Taysom Hill counts in those numbers. I don't know if Taysom Hill counting into those numbers at a certain position impacts other players' opportunities to make the roster at that position, like tight end. I have no idea what to expect from it. But I kind of think that's a good thing. I think the New Orleans Saints, and this has been Dennis Allen's kind of MO from the very beginning. He wanted to create, especially last year when he started with them, he as head coach, he wants to create competition at every level of the roster. And I think he's done a good job of that so far here this offseason.
Yeah, and I think it's important for him this year as you look at
Mm-hmm.
the outlook for this team, and is the fact that, again, we touched on it many times, that this is a team that was in the Drew Brees shadow for a year. Then they're in the Sean Payton shadow for a year. Dennis Allen's able to put his guys in place, get his free agents that he wants. A lot of Raiders infusion. We've talked about that too. And again, this is the point where it's like, you've done everything to assemble what you feel is going to be the best for this team.
Mm-hmm.
Even in bringing in a new analytics guy from the Jets,
Right.
I think it's a big deal that it's analytics is more part of the game than it has been in a long time. And so, again, I think he's trying to make the surface level moves. And again, for fans, nobody really cares about all the behind the scenes stuff. We do, but
Mm-hmm.
they just want to see it on the field and make
Yeah.
sure it works out on the field. And I think there's more reasons to be optimistic there. I've seen the 9-8 predictions and stuff. I mean, their strength of schedule is favorable. I think this is a higher ceiling team than a lot of people. And I think a lot of people nationally are becoming a little bit more bullish on them too. And just saying that, I think New Orleans is one of those teams to keep an eye on, a sleeper team. I think a lot of this hinges around Derek Carr, but again, I see the reinvigoration in him and just how excited he is to be in this spot. And, look, I'm not saying this is Drew 2.0. It's just not, but I think it has potentials and semblances that it can be something special this year.
Yeah, it's the closest that they've been to a Drew style offense since they had a Drew style offense, right? Like they were not that with Jameis Winston. They were not that with Trevor Siemian, Taysom Hill, or Ian Book. And they definitely were not that with Andy Dalton. Like Derek Carr is a better quarterback. And he's a quarterback that gets them a little bit closer to the principles around which they built this offense. And I think that was a difference for Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston doesn't necessarily keep you close to the principles that built the offense. So you have to be willing to revamp the offense if you're going to really put him in position to succeed. They were not willing to do that. They wanted him to conform. And that's tough to do. You can't change a player all the time, right? And so you get a guy that you already have a lot of communication and a shared vocabulary with between Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, and you're able to build that. I think this is the first year since that 2020 season when they had to kind of enter the, or the 2021 season, I guess I'll say, where they had to enter the post-Breeze era, that they have not made additions based upon the subtractions at the most important parts of their team. They brought in Jameis Winston because they lost or they went to Jameis Winston because they lost Drew Brees. They went to Dennis Allen as a part of filling the gap after losing Sean Payton. They went to Jameis Winston after not getting Deshaun Watson. This is really the first year that you've watched Dennis Allen be able to go in and say, I want this quarterback, that quarterback's in the building. I want Michael Thomas back, Michael Thomas is back. I want this coaching staff, I have this coaching staff. So with the exception of the interior defensive line, every addition has been made for the sake of gaining ground, for improving, for getting better, as opposed to every addition being based on the predication of some subtraction that took place before that. You're not filling gaps anymore. You're just trying to get better. And I think they did a good job of that so far over the offseason. On paper, we'll see what it looks like on the field. And we're very close to that finally.
Finally, yes, I know. It's exciting. So I will say that if you're going to attend training camp, again, only 7 open practices. If you're going to be out in LA, you have to be on the Chargers season ticket wait list. It doesn't sound like they're going to let fans from the Saints yet. Could change. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And then the joint practices with the Texans, that's a logistical nightmare. We touched on that before, but that is something where fans, I know it's exciting. You want to see it, but this is a little bit less access for fans. If you do want to claim tickets, you can start on 7/17. That's season ticket holders. Then waitlist members on the 18th, and in general public on the 19th. You can start doing that on the team website starting at 10 a.m. And then the first practice be the 28th, 29th. They've got the 31st. A bunch of them, 4 of them in August. And then, we got all the preseason action and stuff. Mm-hmm. But, look, I mean, it's a great opportunity. Last year, I think there'll be a little bit more indoors this year. As opposed to recent years, just because of how freaking hot it's been. It's been miserable outside and stuff. And so, and it's all weather permitting, but it's a great opportunity to see the team. But, we'll be there day in, day out. tons of observations, tons of notes, tons of locker room stuff, lots of information. This is the time where we've had our break. It's coming to a close, and now it's time to put on the big boy pants and we go to work and do what we do. So, Ross, what else you got for these people? What are you doing in your world right now, and where things are going to kind of go for you?
Oh man, just getting everything ready. I mean, just priming and kind of previewing everything. We spent a lot of time over on Locked On Saints right now, focusing on the Alvin Kamara ness of it all, but also doing some deep dives into some advanced statistics and percentages and things like that, just as a means of looking at, okay, here's how things can shift going into 2023. Soon we'll be doing 53-man roster breakdown or prediction, all those other things. So a lot of just getting ready for training camp and everything, and making sure everybody has the information that they need, so that when they do get out there on the first open practice to public, they know exactly what to be watching for. And of course, that's happening in tandem with Locked On Saints, but of course here at Saints News Network as well.
Yes, if you're not following this guy, you see the handle right there. If we can do it, because I'm all backwards. Ross Jackson Nola. Follow all of his work on Locked On. You see my tag there. Just check out all of our Saints news information. Saints.media, si.com/NFL/Saints. We will have plenty more coming. And in the meantime, stay tuned. Check up with all of our recent articles, all the work that Kyle T. Mosley does, Bob Rose. We work extremely difficult. See, I need another pair of coffee. You said you had 4 coffees this morning. I only had one. It's time for another
4 right here.
Yeah, it's time. So need something. But at any rate, check out all our work. Appreciate all the support, guys. We'll have much more. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.